The good gets great with Tito's. It's basically how can you make any inherently good situation just a little bit better with a Tito's cocktail. When Arts and Letters presented the idea of an autonomous bar cart that from day one was called Spokescart, we just fell in love. It was so different and funny. The scenarios that you can put it in are endless. We never felt like we had the need to have somebody represent the brand for us. When you look at the broader spirits category and how many celebrities are involved with brands these days, we've always done things a little bit differently, and this felt like a way that we could just do it differently than everybody else.
Imagine having the world's top social creative experts on your team, analyzing your ads, auditing your ad library, and helping you deliver more winning creatives. You don't have to imagine anymore because Motion just launched Expert Agents, AI-powered workflows designed by the industry's best creative strategists. These aren't generic AI tools. Each workflow is built by real performance marketers actively managing high-spending ad accounts. You'll get access to things like Creative Performance Analyzer powered by Dara Denny's framework, which helps you break down what's working and what's not with each of your ads. Or Ugly Ad Finder created by Barry Hott, which scans your top spending ads and serves up organic social inspiration so you can make ads that actually stop the scroll. Or Scale Unlocker from Jess Bachman, which maps your current ad spend across the awareness stages to pinpoint your biggest growth unlock. Plus, Motion's expert agents include custom tools for social listening, strategic ad iteration, and more, giving your team the insights of a veteran creative strategist at no extra cost. Start shipping more winning ads today at motionapp.com/expert-agents. Taylor Berry, welcome to the DTC Podcast. This marks the first time we've had a liquor brand, I believe, on the podcast. Not to mention the United States #1 vodka brand, Tito's Handmade Vodka, one of my favorite brands. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric. This is going to be great.
Yeah, this came about through a press release that you guys sent out about a campaign that you're running that I want to dive into. But maybe let's start. I always like to start with people's hero's journey. So if you could just talk a little bit about your hero's journey. I know you've been at Tito's for a bit over 6 years. A little bit of your hero's journey and lead that into kind of a story of Tito's as a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spent a lot of my career working on Apple doing advertising for them in Los Angeles. And I moved out to New York, worked at a couple agencies and landed at Droga 5 and was able to work on the Dos Equis account there, which was such an interesting challenge because I think we were the first agency to get the business after they retired the most interesting man in the world. So just a super challenging brief. And it kind of got my feet wet with the alcohol industry. And it was super interesting to just kind of see the intricacies of the alcohol industry. It's so complicated and every state runs differently. And there's this 3-tier system with distributors. And anyway, I was going out to Austin for a USC UT football game. I'm a Trojan, graduated from there. And basically, I was doing this Dos Equis thing and I got introduced to Tito. And Tito Beverage, which is his actual real name, absolutely crazy.
That's his last name is Beverage?
Beverage, spelled a little bit differently,
okay.
R-I-D-G-E, but
unreal.
Nomenclature is destiny. So I ended up having this conversation with him, and it was just kind of, like two people meeting and kind of understanding, and getting to know each other. Basically, he had a head of marketing role open and asked me if I wanted to hop in his truck and go interview for it. And so I did. And so I basically had to cancel all my plans for that weekend for this game and ended up going to the office, having a couple of conversations and moved into a bunch of different rounds and ended up moving from New York to Austin about 2 months later. And man, it was the best decision of my entire life. I mean, I think it opened up so many opportunities, both for me and also just to be able to be a part of something so special. At the time, Tito's was already, on this insane growth path. And it was just so refreshing to be in an organization like Tito's Handmade Vodka that really still embraced that sort of family-owned business. And, it's still private and it allowed for so much creativity and kind of be able to bring all of the experiences that I had at larger organizations and bring it to something that still felt incredibly small and still does to this day feel incredibly small. So that's a brief summary of kind of my path here.
And describe for those who may not know, we've got a mostly U.S. audience, but with a lot of internationals who listen as well. But like, describe just Tito's brand ascendancy. Like, it started in the mid '90s as like I was just chat GPTing it, just like as grassroots a beginning as you could expect.
Yeah, I mean, I could sit here for an hour and a half and tell you the whole story, but I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Yes, Tito
Distill it.
is yeah, distill it down exactly. Tito is just a absolutely magnetic figure and really really incredibly smart. He actually was a geologist and geophysicist. Graduated from UT. Spent a lot of his early jobs in the oil business in South America. He had, I think, 3 different failed companies that he had started. My favorite is the Uno Oil Corporation because he was the Uno employee.
Okay.
But, it's as if his luck continually ran out, right? He would start this job and then it would be, a horrible situation that he kind of end up moving back to Texas and would start this new company. And then, some geopolitical thing happened and it caused, the oil industry to come crashing down. After all of that, all of these different failures, a friend of his told him that he should get into the mortgage business. And so he decides to do that. He was previously in Tyvek suits and sweating in all of these, oil fields. And there he got to, be in air conditioning with a suit and whatever. And, at the time, though, he was still broke. He started his own mortgage company, still broke. And as gifts, he started infusing cheap vodka for his friends. So he'd basically take a plastic, bottle of vodka, put it into a mason jar, put some dried cherries or habaneros or whatever it might be, whatever, the flavor du jour was that year, and gift it for holidays and birthdays and things like that. And the story goes, he was at a party and a guy comes up to him and he's like, "Hey, you're the vodka guy, right?" And he's like, "No, I'm actually the mortgage guy. What are you talking about?" And it basically just got him thinking. And he saw this late night talk show that was basically, inspirational speaker that said, if you want to find your passion, write a line down the middle of a sheet of paper. On one side, write what you're good at, and the other side, what you love to do. And, it's not as emotional as you think it would be in terms of this list. It's like, I like math. I like problem solving. I like, or I'm good at that. I'm good at talking to people. I love talking to people. I like AC. I like science, right? But it's like all of these kind of different, kind of innate things about the person that kind of led him to like, I could actually do this vodka thing. And so, you go back to the mid 90s and it's fascinating because, I think at the time he thought, oh, I can just take these mason jars or, these infusions and take it to a liquor store. But like I was mentioning, the alcohol industry is very complicated and you can't just go into a liquor store as a supplier and go sell something and get cash in return. Right. And so he kind of had to go back to the drawing board. The wildest thing about all of this is that, you think about Texas and you think about cowboys and whiskey and all these things. There wasn't a single legal distillery in Texas at the time. So Tito basically had to read through all of the code and basically figure out how he could actually make a distillery and actually start one. He read through the code. He went to the library and made photocopies of everything and ended up basically getting a distilling license from the state of Texas. And, it's funny because he's not a distiller by trade, right? So not only, infusing is a lot different than distilling. And, you kind of take that sort of mentality that he has of like a problem solver and a scientist. And he started, gathering photos of old moonshiners from the turn of the century and started basically built his first still out of scrap parts, a turkey frying rig and an old keg. And it's basically tinkered around with it with different ingredients, bought all the top shelf vodka and tried different ingredients, different distillation methods until he felt like what he made was better than anything else that you could buy on the shelf. And you think that, okay, yeah, the story ends there. He started Tito's Handmade Vodka. Again, there's so much more detail and it's such a fun story to go and kind of dive into. But you're still a nascent brand with no funding. I mean, the other thing is he tried to get investors and he didn't get any and had to put the whole thing on 19 credit cards where he just transfer the balance over and over again to new credit cards. And, it's it's a grind trying to start any sort of brand. And you don't have it back in the mid 90s, you don't have the same resources that you necessarily do today, especially within the marketing space. But I think it's interesting. It's the power of word of mouth. And I think it's also the power of Texas brands. People in this state love the products from this state. And I think, when people started trying it even around Austin, they would bring it home or bring it to their friends and that sort of thing. And I think we always credit so much of our success to our fans because truthfully, in those early days, they were just a huge part of the growth of the brand. But at the same time, the value prop of Tito's, I think, is something that really helped drive the growth too, right? It was designed as being a really good product at a really fair price. In this kind of world of spirits where all these like lofty ideals are present, this was just a really nice breath of fresh air.
And I can see that in the brand. Like I actually just Googled like Tito's brand evolution and it looks like it hasn't changed. Like the actual brand itself, the brand mark looks the same. Maybe there's some slight differences. I was reading just about the bottle choice. Talk a little bit about the brand and the actual product appearance and how that's maybe led to this Texas brand growth as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a stock bottle, right? It's not anything we've designed in a lab or anything like that. Tito designed the label himself in Corel Draw, and he thought Lucida calligraphy was the fanciest font that he could find and thought it was really premium. And it's on a craft paper label that looks like a napkin that you could get at a truck stop. It's just kind of like a lot of it was based around necessity and kind of the resources that were available at the time. And it's funny because I feel like the logo and the brand mark have, at the beginning, a lot of people said it was ugly, right? It's just an ugly logo. And it's become almost iconic and representative of even just kind of like the craft movement of itself, and I think we have every opportunity that we could want to go redesign it. And it's actually super interesting to go on the internet and see kind of some design case studies of people that have redesigned our branding. But it's so important to who we are, right? And we haven't changed. And the fact that we make one product, right? It's just, we love to say it's vodka flavored vodka. It's the same thing that you've been getting, for 25 years, and it just hasn't changed. And sure, there's been like some slight label updates and things like that, but nothing that's, groundbreaking brand complete refresh.
Talk a little bit about Tito's evolution as a craft brand and what that exactly means.
I would say that like Tito's is almost one of kind of the grandfathers of the craft movement, right? When you think about craft beer and even just kind of that whole trend in the early 2000s, 2010s, where kind of everybody was dressing as if they were a member of Mumford and Sons. It got super popular, and it wasn't like a marketing ploy for us, right? It truly was. I mean, there was a guy that was distilling this by hand. He was putting all of these paper labels with Elmer's glue onto every single bottle, hand filling everything, right? It was true. It wasn't something that was just kind of made up. And, I think it is representative of kind of the craft movement. And again, something that was kind of like the foundation of some of that, especially within the spirit space. I think it's something that stayed with us. And we always say, it's the same stuff that we've always made. We just have a lot more stills, right? We've just had to kind of, grow for the demand of the consumer that we have and the love that we have from our fans. But it's not contrived. It's something and that is, it's an overused word, but it's authentic to us because it's truly where we came from.
How important, it's funny, my introduction to the brand was I was in San Diego actually, and my friend who was an ex-bartender was telling me that it was like the only thing that she drinks. It was her favorite. How important has that like relationship with bartenders and bar owners been for the brand?
Hugely important. I mean, I think again, it goes back to that word of mouth, and they have been just that community in general has been such an incredible relationship for us throughout the history of this brand. And as you've seen, and I wasn't here for all of this, but you saw the brand kind of grow outside of Texas. It's that recommendation engine, right? It's people believing in the brand and understanding the story and hearing where we came from, right? And understanding that it's not something that is just kind of developed by a marketing team. It is that authenticity of the brand that I think has led so many people to have a relationship with it, whether it's a consumer or a bartender. And we're forever grateful to that entire community, because it truly couldn't, this whole thing could not have happened without them. And we continue to try to improve and extend those relationships as much as we possibly can. It's such an important part of this industry and of our business at large.
Yeah, I'm just reading, like, unlike traditional vodka brands that emphasize sleek bottles and exclusivity, your branding is unpolished, friendly, and humorous, resonates deeply with everyday drinkers, and has become a challenger brand in the industry dominated by premium imports. I'm curious, from a brand marketing perspective, I want to get into the Spokescart campaign that you're launching now, or you've launched. What were some of the, in terms of your marketing role at the brand? What were some of the early wins before the Spokescart that you were sort of a part of championing?
I think the biggest thing was really honing in on the brand voice, right? And even from the quote you just said, right, it's a crowded category. I mean, spirits, there is infinite choice, right? You go to any liquor store, and the store is dedicated to liquor, right? The only other thing that's like that is like a bookstore, right? Like, there's just so many different things that are available. And of course, the quality of the product. And I think that's paramount. And again, I think that's probably the main reason as to why people have gravitated towards this brand, is understanding just that it was so good and so reasonable. But as we continue to grow, understanding that we have to have a personality with a brand, we need to have a relationship with consumers, was a huge thing that we were trying to accomplish. And I think we really honed in on this sort of irreverent tone that doesn't take anything too seriously. It's there are people behind this brand, right? And it goes back to that idea of it still being this independent company that has real people behind it, and real people that have been there for a long time, that have watched it grow and been part of the entire journey. And I think we want to make sure that comes through in every piece of communication that we have, and that there's some emotional connection to it, right? Of course, there's the hardworking things, but understanding how to even articulate those hardworking conversion type tactics in a way that feels like you're establishing a relationship with the consumer is, I think, incredibly important. And we started really kind of honing that in, a year or two from when I started getting that, when I got there. Probably the best example of it in that time was, the canned cocktail seltzer trend started happening, right? And all of these brands started popping up. You had White Claw and Truly and those sorts of things, but then you also had, pretty much every major spirits brand making their own canned cocktail, right? And we were never going to do that, right? Again, we do one product well, one product only. And we saw a lot of consumers asking us to make a Tito's and soda in a can or something like that. And so we came up with this kind of silly idea about selling essentially like a Yeti cooler or Yeti, vessel in the shape of a can that was just empty. So you could make whatever you wanted on the inside. And it was called Tito's in a can. And, you could go buy it on our web store, and I still use it daily. It's kind of it's just a quirky thing. I mean, like the entire branding of the whole thing looks like it should be a seltzer. And so, once we launched that, the feedback that we were getting through the social media was very much so like, this is something that only Tito's could do. And when we started to internalize that, of like, these are the kinds of swings that we should be taking, right? These are the kinds of swings of a personality that can be unique, and something that kind of is different from this industry that can be very cookie cutter.
The other thing that I wanted to mention to my girlfriend, when I said I was going to have you guys on the podcast, she's like, "Oh, they're the vodka for dog people," and I hadn't heard of that. How did that come about?
Again, I think it's like something that's based in reality. So, like, mentioning this whole story, and again, Tito was out there by himself. He built this small 998 square foot shack that he distilled out of for years, and it was just him and his dog Joe, out there. And it's kind of out, towards, outside of like the main Austin city center, where our distillery is and still is today. but he has dog out there, and he'd put food out for Dog Joe, and then a bunch of strays would start coming, and he would take them in and feed them too. And it was just kind of something that was, inherent to Tito as a person, and then part of our brand. And now we have a whole program called Vodka for Dog People, and it's run by one of our employees that has been here the longest. And she loves dogs. She was hired, kind of basically started helping support local shelters and nonprofits in Austin to help solve the stray dog issue. And as we continue to grow and started kind of having that be more of a cornerstone of the organization, we started working with a local nonprofit here called Emancipet that works on low cost spay neuter in Austin, and kind of thinking about how do you solve the larger stray problem at large. And so it kind of just grew into something that now we activate across the entire country and, again, internationally. And it's all based in philanthropy around animals and dogs. And, it's whether it's, we call them yappy hours, doing them at bars and inviting consumers. It's all based around fundraising. But it's become an amazing marketing tool as well, right? People love dogs, but it's everything that we do with it. It's not just to say Tito's and dogs. It's that Tito's loves dogs, and we want to help every city that we operate in. And I think, again, going back to what we were saying about, the bottle or kind of our personality or anything, it's inherent and true to what this brand. It's not a contrived marketing tool.
And it's a great audience to resonate with, right? Because they're a great group of customers. They're loyal, like dogs, and I think it was a really smart move. It definitely got my girlfriend is a Tito's lifetime customer. I think because of that reason.
I mean, I love it. And again, I think we're doing great work in this space. It's a perfect example of like how to marry something like that is based in this kind of emotional truth of the brand, and then with that sort of irreverent tone. And this is one of my other favorite things that we've done, but we did this whole campaign around the walktail, which is basically a cocktail that you drink while you're on a walk with your dog.
Roadie.
Exactly. And we, our team kind of flagged it during the pandemic and saw a New York Times article about it, that people were doing this. And we're like, well, we could make an entire thing out of this. And it was pretty fun. We designed like a fanny pack, but it had like a bandolier, so you could fit little minis on your belt. So if you're on and it had a little cup holder and stuff. So it's just kind of it was just some fun marketing tactics that we were playing around with this whole Vodka for Dog People platform.
Super cool. Let's talk a little bit about the Spokescart. How did the Spokescart campaign concept first come about?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we do here. I think there's an ethos of kind of doing what you love at Tito's, or letting Tito's help do what you love or what you care about. So whether that is, in the nonprofit space or in the sponsorships or whatever. And, your communication can kind of get a little bit varied, right? And I think there is importance on being consistent in how you speak as a brand. And we felt like there was a need to kind of house everything under kind of a singular brand platform. And we hadn't really had that before. We had a tagline that was America's Original Craft Vodka, which is great. I mean, we are America's Original Craft Vodka, but how, again, do we kind of evolve that into something with more personality? And so we worked with our agency, Arts and Letters, and developed this brand platform called With Tito's. And the idea is basically you can put anything in front of that and we'll be there, right? It's martinis with Tito's, it's pre-games with Tito's, it's game days with Tito's, whatever it is, right? It can be as esoteric as you want it to be, but we can help make that a great situation. But as we were going to kind of, soft launch this, we're just thinking, okay, what is the way that we can kind of embody this into a singular campaign, right? If With Tito's is going to materialize in every piece of marketing that we do, what's the tentpole idea? And the Spokescart came from this With Tito's line that was the good gets great with Tito's, right? And it's basically, how can you make any inherently good situation just a little bit better with a Tito's cocktail? And when Arts and Letters presented the idea of an autonomous bar cart that from day one was called Spokescart, we just fell in love. It was so different and funny. And, the beauty of it is that the scenarios that you can put it in are endless, right? Especially from an advertising point of view. There are so many just kind of everyday situations that are good. They are objectively good scenarios. Make them a little bit better with the Tito's cocktail. And so it was a little bit of like a funky idea that, it's a little bit outside of the kind of like traditional advertising space. But we love the concept of not having a spokesperson, right? I think that's something that we've never really done as a brand and never really relied on celebrities. And well, obviously we love the celebrities that love Tito's. We never felt like we had the need to have somebody kind of represent the brand for us. And this was such an interesting way of thinking about it, especially when you look at the broader spirits category and how many celebrities are involved with brands these days. It feels like maybe it's kind of slowing down a little bit now, but it was at a fever pitch where it felt like there was like 10 new brands coming out a day with some sort of celebrity tied to them. And we've always done things a little bit differently. And this felt like a way that we could just, do it differently than everybody else. And why not have kind of this little autonomous, rickety thing come into everyday situations and make it a little bit better.
I love it. And I keep thinking of, because if it's like with Tito's, you need something that is introducing Tito's to a situation. And that could, I think of like the Kool-Aid man busting on a bunch of kids, like having fun in a room, which is where they'd be drinking Kool-Aid. And he's like, oh yeah. And it's like, or like the most interesting man in the world for Dos Equis shows up and it's like, oh, you need this beer or whatever. But in your case, it's literally like a short circuit, like Spokescart that can print out little messages. I was noticing humorous messages, just kind of rolls up and offers Tito's.
Yeah. And I guess for our listeners, a Spokescart is a bar cart, right? So it's just a bar cart that has, pours Tito's cocktails, through a little hole that comes out from the top. And you mentioned the printer. And I think that's probably the most fun part of the campaign is to think through what that little wink is at the end, right? What's the little extra thing that this bar cart can bring to every situation? And I think in the first year, as we launched it and we saw the feedback from that campaign, there was one of you mentioned it earlier, the rolling retriever one where, it's at a dog park and it's just launching tennis balls through this bar cart. And it's quirky, it's weird, it's fun. And that was probably the most fun spot to shoot that year because it was all done pretty much practically, right? So we're actually like throwing, tennis balls out to dogs that are there at the park. But when it came to this year and coming up with 4 new ads, figuring out what that little wink was going to be it's the most exciting part, right? It's how are we going to bring even more joy to this scenario?
And so talk about the rollout. When you've got this campaign, you're working with your agency, you produce the creative for a brand that has a footprint the size of Tito's. What does rollout look like for a creative concept like this?
It's a good question. We do things a little bit differently. A few years back, Tito said that he was going to flatten the marketing budget and triple the philanthropy budget, right? So despite the success of Tito's, it's not like we have, budgets of huge advertisers. We don't do linear TV ads. And so we're resourceful very much as the way the Spokescart is resourceful in a way. But, I think this sort of campaign is part of a larger ecosystem for us. And so when we think about the rollout of it, it's, what's the goal of content like this for us? And again, I think that goes back to the personality point from earlier. It's how are we going to, articulate what this brand is all about? How are we going to establish that relationship with a fan or consumers? And so this is very much in that sort of awareness consideration set, right? It's how do we in the same way that in the ads, the Spokescart comes to any situation, it's like, how can we make someone's feed just a little bit better, right? How can we make the viewing experience just a little bit better? At the end goal, it's meant to be entertaining. And so, it's very much in a paid media sense focused on social media, streaming platforms and digital video, especially in 2024 when we first launched it. Once we saw kind of the response to it, and it ended up being our highest performing ad set last year, and we track it in a bunch of different ways. Again, it's a little bit different than, let's say an e-commerce ad that's directing you directly to Instacart or DoorDash or something like that. Vodka in general, right, isn't something that you go out and buy every single day, right? But it's something that you want to make sure is top of mind, right? And that someone, again, feels like they have this relationship with. And so as an ad campaign, it's very much meant to do that, right? Like it's meant to continually remind you of this brand out there that's just a little bit quirky and that you should bring to your next party.
And it's not over the top. It's funny. I was watching Super Bowl commercials, and so many of them were just like so over the top that it was like I think of like the seal campaign where it's like seal is actually a seal, and I'm like, okay, like whereas like just that little bit of like a relatable experience and then something a little bit quirky, a little bit funny to me is such a smarter brand play than something, you know, way over the top. I guess for me as a consumer anyway.
Yeah, and I think there's a place for everything, right? Like if you want to go completely over the top, and especially for something like the Super Bowl that garners a ton of attention, and you want to stand out, it's to your point, there's a lot that's out there, right? So if you're one of many that are over the top and crazy, and the seal is a seal example, or even I think another huge thing that we're seeing in advertising right now are these kind of like almost music video type ads, right? Where a ton of like, music driven dancing type of things. There's not really a way that you can stand out from the others, right? Like it's like the classic insurance thing, right? Where you see an insurance ad over and over again. You're like, I know that person from that insurance ad, but I don't know what insurance ad that is because they all have people that do things, And to your point, I think it's not meant to be gut busting. It's meant to be charming, right? And if people can feel charmed by a rickety pile of wood, great, and a good cocktail.
When you mentioned the metrics being different, like what kind of metrics are you guys looking at when you roll these video assets out? Is it sort of engagement? Is it view time? Are you looking at localized, like where you're spending, and then you're looking at sort of like retail spend that increases along those lines? How do you look at performance?
It's a great question, especially again with this industry. Alcohol is notorious for not having very much sales data, right? Or first party data, because for the most part, outside of wine clubs and a couple of direct to consumer bottle marketplaces, first party data is hard to come by because by law we're not allowed to sell directly to a consumer. So it gets very creative in the way that you start kind of thinking about campaigns and how we look at tracking them. Engagement's a huge thing for a campaign like this, right? Again, something that's supposed to garner an emotion, likes, shares, comments, those sorts of things are a very good barometer for us to kind of just see how these are working, right? Also just having it kind of appear within kind of the cultural zeitgeist. But I think at the same time, we've got to get smarter in this sort of world, and we have a pretty robust audience segmentation that we work with and work, within our media plan. And that allows us to also kind of tweak the way that each one of these ads materializes in any given platform, right? So when you kind of think about any one scenario or vignette of these ads, there's probably 4 or 5 different versions that we have running at any given time, right? With maybe a different headline at the start, maybe a different subtitle. It just depends on what it is, but we can kind of target it based off of what the different audience profiles are from our segmentation, and from that you can kind of pair it with receipt data from larger panel organizations like a Numerator or an IRI or that sort of thing to kind of really be able to determine household penetration, any sort of increase in household sales, and that's very directional for us. It's definitely not a bulletproof sort of way of actually analyzing the performance. But it at least gives us kind of a directional idea of how things are going. And this one, again, comparatively to some of the other things we've run throughout the year, performed at the highest level.
I'm on your YouTube channel right now, and I don't know what you guys do on YouTube. Just from we've actually just started at DTC, just starting to promote our podcasts on YouTube, and we're seeing extraordinary results. Like we're seeing extremely cheap views and long views, and so we're trying to suss it out right now to see what it actually is. But that might be you guys may already do that, but I feel like there's a real opportunity on YouTube especially for creative that's as high quality as what you guys are producing, that are also entertaining and and an ad at the same time.
Yeah, and YouTube is a fun one. We definitely do. We do a lot of YouTube advertising. but it's, it's very contextually based, right? And I think each one of these vignettes, and again, now that there's 8 of them, you can target them based off of what someone is viewing or what they're interested in. And then when you kind of go on the other opposite side of the spectrum, where it's more of like a cocktail focused campaign, we're actually driving some sort of recipe, which we also have a ton of fun with. And there's infinite possibilities of how you can name a cocktail based off of like an everyday situation. Kind of pairing those two things together in a very contextual manner with YouTube has been awesome for us as well.
You mentioned a little bit in our pre-talk there about in-person events, and I think that's a big priority for a lot of brands that we talk to. You were talking a little bit about how the Spokescart can be sort of like an in-person experience as well. What are some of the things you have planned for in-person events with brands like Tito's?
Yes, it's fun. The Spokescart that's in the ad was actually developed by a few of the people that worked on the original R2D2. It's a
royalty.
Cool little yeah, pretty cool. And it's got kind of some of the same sort of, personality quirks as R2D2 has. But in my opinion, the one that we shoot with kind of belongs in a museum. It doesn't belong kind of out there in the real world. And so we've over the past couple of months actually worked on making replicas of the Spokescart that you see in the actual commercials. And it works just the same as it does in the commercial. It also, again, it kind of gives you the ability to customize it for any sort of event. So ostensibly, if we want to put a t-shirt cannon in it, we could. But again, you kind of see the possibilities of this roaming bar cart that's controlled by somebody out of view with just a remote control, and just providing a little bit of that surprise and delight to consumers. We do a lot of music festivals around the United States, and we just see that there's a lot of opportunity there, even just to hand out, if it's not making a cocktail, if we can't do that in kind of the GA presence, it's handing out bandanas or that sort of thing. I think getting it into situations that are culturally relevant, through any of our given sponsorships, where, getting that sort of, user generated content of this thing, surprising, delighting consumers. That's where I kind of see some of the future of this going, right? Is actually making it a character that people can actually interact with in real life. And then also utilizing, those replicas that we've made in our organic social, right? In those kind of everyday, even office situations. You can imagine working at Tito's is a pretty fun office environment, and we can play around with it in a myriad of different ways. And so I think it'll be, now that we kind of have the footing with the entire kind of ad campaign, expanding it beyond that, right, into kind of some earned media situations and in real life situations, with all of the events that we do across the country, is going to be, I think, the next unlock for us.
Super cool. Yeah. What, like, just in general with the brand, like, I guess you guys are, you're number one. The question that keeps coming to mind for me is, like, how hard has it been to fend off the idea that you do have to make a bunch of flavored vodkas? Because I feel like every competitor out there is making a bunch of flavored vodkas, and you guys have really stuck to your guns. Has that been an internal struggle, or has it just been a non-starter because of Tito's vision?
Yeah, it's almost a point of pride at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like, and again, I think that goes back to being an independent company, right? We have license to make those sorts of decisions without having to kind of appease any sort of outside investors or anything like that. And so the whole ethos of this is like, do something. If you're going to do it well, do it great, right? And we don't have the need to go and expand and iterate and have a innovation pipeline. Of course, there's been times where you're like, it's enticing to do that, right? But flavors go in and out of style, right? There was a time when like whipped cream flavored vodka was a big thing, or then you go into like mangoes and herbs and all these different things, right? And the staying power of Tito's, I think, is what makes it so special, right? It's that it's come as you are. It is what it is. It doesn't change. And it's here for you, right? It's here when you need something, and if you want to have a good cocktail, you just reach for that, right? And we also believe, I don't know if you've ever tried an infusion, but just throwing some fresh fruit into a bottle and letting it sit for a few hours, it's 10 out of 10, right? And you're not getting any like artificial or even natural flavorings or anything like that. You're just kind of getting like the essence of, whatever you're putting in there.
Well, Taylor, I want to thank you for coming on the DTC podcast today. If you are in our audience, then you, especially in the States, you got to be on the lookout for this roving autonomous, Spokescart, and let us know about your experience. This was a lot of fun, Taylor. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.